I'm not a big fan of the steady games of reading to you. That's not too exciting. But I want to read this particular part because it's such a pivotal part of the tournament. It's on the fourth round, and Nicklaus has just birdied 16, and he's approaching 17. And there was, fortunately, in order to write about this, there was not only quite a bit of reporting done on it because it was such an exciting moment, the pivotal point of the tournament, but that one of the people I was able to interview was Vern Lundquist, and Lundquist was the guy in the tower at 17 for CBS. And I remember when I interviewed him, he said to this day it remains the most exciting call I ever made as a sports broadcaster, which I thought was amazing because he's done college football, college basketball, and everything, tennis. So I just want to read these 2 pages. And I should point out that Lundquist is in 17, so what's been happening is he keeps hearing the crowd, the noise approaching. It's like artillery thunder, as far away. But the troops are getting closer, so that there's more cheering, and it's getting closer, and it's getting more intense. But he's in 17, so he's not, and he's got to pay attention to what's going on at 17. So here's what his situation is on Sunday afternoon. Finally, remembers Vern Lundquist, the CBS announcer could see for himself what all the noise was about. Though not a Masters rookie, he was covering the 17th hole for the network for the first time. For 2 hours I listened to the building waves of applause and roars that followed Jack, he recalls. I was in the tower behind the 17th hole, and I would take my headset off on occasion as he played his way to me, and I would hear those sounds. Above the din, Jack said to his son as they walked to the next tee, "Hey, I haven't had this much fun in 6 years." He's referring to the last time he won a major championship. Nicklaus faced a very unusual opponent as he stood on the tee at 17, tears. The reaction of the crowd at the 15th and 16th greens, which he later described as deafening, had packed an emotional wallop. For sure, it was a show of affection and support unlike anything he had heard since the U.S. Open 6 years earlier. Jack had journeyed very far from his first years as a professional, including those early Masters championships, when he was far from being a fan favorite. Now, on this Sunday, there wasn't a more popular athlete in the world. However, after he gathered himself and launched his tee shot on 17, the par 4 Nandina, some patrons worried that the incredible string of golf was coming to an end at the worst possible time. Jack's plan was to draw the ball to the left side of the fairway to give him the best angle to the flagstick, which could be found in the back right of the green. But his drive went farther left than he wanted, and the ball wound up between 2 pine trees on hard ground. Jack had 120 yards left. His first thought, 9-iron. But he saw an overhanging tree branch in the way, which meant he had to keep the ball low. Adding to that challenge was that the 17th green was one of the firmest on the course, and he had to make sure he spun the ball enough that it stopped on the green. The only solution he could devise was a low pitching wedge hit with a cut spin. He positioned the ball 2 inches farther back in his stance than normal to try to put a lid on the height of the shot. He swung. The ball streaked under the tree branch, missing it by less than 2 feet. The ball hit the green. Would it stop? At first, no. Then the heavy spin cut in. The ball stopped 11 feet from the hole, left and slightly below it. Long-time observers, many of them yelling themselves hoarse, recognized that they had most likely just witnessed the finest shot on 17 under intense pressure in Masters history. Not a single person watching the Masters did not realize that those 11 feet were the distance to a birdie and Jack's outright lead of the championship. He and Jackie read the green with extra care. True, if he managed only par, he could still try to gain another stroke at 18, but Nicklaus was too much in the zone to allow anything to slip away. But he couldn't read it. The green was enigmatic and almost deliberately secretive. After looking at Jackie, he made his decision. Just hit it at the hole with what he thought would be the right speed and hope for the best. Sometimes even the greatest golfer ever has to rely on hope. And on his experience, too, which told him there could not be much break. His somewhat ungainly putter tapped the ball. As it traveled, it shivered to the left. Then it shivered to the right. Before it could attempt another direction, the ground under it was empty and it fell into the cup. When it was about a foot away, I said, "Maybe," says Lundquist. And then I said, "Yes, sir." It was the first time I'd ever said that on the air, and Peter Costas told me years later that Ben Wright had said it the same thing earlier that day for the 15th, so I guess it just slipped into my subconscious. Jack had known it was in when the ball was still 3 feet from the cup. A huge smile opened his face. He lunged forward, his tongue curled at the front of his mouth, as if he had just caught sight of a huge steak, and he raised his putter in the air like a sword to lead true believers into battle. Jackie jumped, and only his body, not his heart, would come back to earth. Even the most cynical patron at Augusta National was stunned. Jack Nicklaus, at 46, was not only hanging around late on a Sunday afternoon, but was leading the best golfers in the world. So that was the putt that Jack, birding 17, and for the first time, on the 71st hole of the tournament, he takes the lead for the first time. And some of you, I have the photograph in here, and some of you, I guess, will remember. It's become such a well-known shot of Jack. You know, this is him after he hit the putt and goes in. He raises the putter like this, and you know, his mouth is open, and obviously very excited. The crowd is going crazy, and many people to this day will believe that that Masters is the best Masters that has ever taken place. And when I was writing the book, I wanted to do three things with the book. One was, I did want to write a book that included some history of the Masters. You know, not every little detail. I always point to, there's a wonderful book by David Owen called The Making of the Masters, which is something like 300, 400 pages long. It's got all the really in-depth detail. Anybody wants to know more about the Masters, I recommend the book. And I certainly refer to it as a source. But I wanted to have it be sort of like a swiftly moving history of the Masters. Not every Masters that was played, not every shot that was hit. And by doing that, I could talk about how it was founded by Bobby Jones and Clifford Roberts, and that first great Masters shot with Gene Sarazen with the double eagle in 1935, and along the way you find out little tidbits, you know, like Gene Sarazen hit that double eagle on the 15th hole to tie for the lead, and most people think that's what won him the tournament, and actually it didn't. He only parred the final 3 holes and had to go for a playoff the next day, which he won. But there were great matchups right before World War II with Byron Nelson and Ben Hogan going into overtime, and then afterwards when you had Sammy Snead starting to win Masters, and you had other really good golfers too, like Clyde Mangrum would win, and some of these other, you know, somewhat still known names from the past, Art Wall, and then the big change when Snead and Hogan and Nelson were pretty much, Byron Nelson pretty much retired by then. Along came Arnold Palmer, and Palmer was this very dynamic guy. And right away, you've heard the expression "Arnie's Army." It began at Augusta National because what they used to do in those days, which is in the late 1950s, is they used to go to the nearby fort. It might have been Fort Benning, but I'm not positive about that. But there was a fort nearby, and the organizers of the Masters would say, "Listen, any of you fellows want to volunteer to be rangers and marshals and stuff like that? You get the whole weekend free attending the Masters." So these guys would show up in uniform, and the most exciting player in the Masters was Arnold Palmer. So you got these guys cheering him on. And, you know, Arnie would look over, and there'd be all these guys in uniform. So the nickname became Arnie's Army, and that lasted for years and years and years. Palmer won 4 green jackets, won the Masters 4 times. I should point out to another great player who was a rival of Palmer's was Gary Player, who would end up winning it 3 times himself. But so that's one part of the story, to tell the background of the Masters. Another part of the story was sort of reacquaint readers with Jack Nicklaus's career. I mean, in the era of Tiger Woods that we've had for the last almost 15 years, it's tended to get a little lost that Jack Nicklaus was and is the greatest golfer of all time. He still has the most majors. He was just an intimidation factor. And there's something that this 86 tournament illustrates that Tiger hasn't done. I mean, as many wonderful performances Tiger has given. I mean, in 2000 at Pebble Beach, he won the U.S. Open by 12 shots. It's pretty incredible. But one thing that Tiger hasn't done that Jack did, and certainly did this in 86, is come from behind. You know, Tiger Woods was always somebody who went out there, he kicked a lot of butt, and then got a good lead, and then took that, everybody else got kind of intimidated, and fell back, and Tiger would win. And but Jack Nicklaus could not only win when he dominated, but he could also win when he got off to kind of stumbled a little bit, and he could catch up to people like Trevino and Palmer and Tom Watson and Johnny Miller and some of these others. He had these great contemporary players, Tom Weiskopf, people like that. So I wanted to talk about Jack Nicklaus's history, how when he first became a professional, And when he played at the Masters, Palmer was the big favorite, and Nicklaus was kind of almost seen as like the villain. Because Palmer was the good guy, Nicklaus wore the black hat, just figuratively. The very first tournament that Nicklaus won was the 1962 Open in Pennsylvania, where Palmer was from, and the crowd was getting into it. They'd call him Fat Boy, go back to Ohio, and all these other insults, which you don't hear in a golf course. These days you don't hear people calling out to, hey Phil, lose 10 pounds. Something you don't see that much. But that's what was happening then. And Nicklaus, he was rotund. Let's put it that way, with his short crew cut. Looked like he just stepped off the farm. But he won the Masters in '60. Palmer won the Masters in '62. Nicklaus won it in '63. Palmer won it in '64. Nicklaus won it in '65. And then Nicklaus won it again in '66, the first one to repeat as a Masters champion. And that's sort of like things changed. I mean, Bobby Jones, the great Bobby Jones, said when Nicklaus was playing the 1965 Masters, he said he plays a game with which I am not familiar. And that became a famous quote. What he was saying is Nicklaus came along with this great combination of power and finesse around the greens and iron shots and things like that, and this very, very iron determination to win, and he did. And he was winning all through the 60s and all through the 70s, and then things changed for him after 1980 because he got distracted by a lot of things. I mean, he turned 40 in 1980, which nowadays 40 does not mean you're finished as a golfer. Look at B.J. Singh. I mean, he's won as many times over 40 as he won under 40. And Sam Snead won a bunch of times over 40, and there's always Craig Perry, there's always guys over 40 winning now. Payne Stewart won the U.S. Open, he was 42, I believe, and Steve Stricker's in his 40s now and still winning. But in the 1980s, a golfer in his 40s was pretty much considered washed up. They couldn't win anymore, certainly not a major championship. And so when 1986 rolls around, that's the situation that Jack Nicklaus found himself in. I haven't won in 6 years. Everybody's saying, they're putting in the newspaper, I'm washed up, I'm done. One of the things I did is I saw that the coverage at the time before the tournament began that Tom Kite, who at the time was at the peak of his abilities, he was winning the winning title year after year, he was a wonderful player. And he was actually quoted as saying, Nicklaus is, we can pretty much say, washed up, and nobody fears him anymore. He's not a factor anymore in the tournaments. And so one of the things I wanted to make sure I did is contact Tom Kite 25 years later. And he was good about it. I said, "Do you want to retract any of that? You want to take back what you said?" He said, "No." He said, "What I was saying at the time was the truth." He said, "I turned out to be wrong, but it was the truth." None of us thought. When I interviewed Pat Summerall, and some of you remember Pat Summerall was the guy in the 18th tower at the Masters that year. Covered golf for many years for CBS, and when I contacted Pat Summerall at his home in Dallas. And I was asking him about it. He said the thing that was remarkable to me is that you'd have, before the tournament began, you'd have your office pools, you'd have your handicap, and who's got the best chance. You're sort of sussing things out because you're trying to figure out who you're going to follow with the cameras, some more than others. And he said, Jack Nicklaus wasn't even in the conversation. He wasn't even mentioned. Forget it. And even up until a guy who just passed away a month or so ago, Frank Jacquinian, was the longtime producer for CBS Sports and their golf coverage. And he was doing the '86 Masters. And even on the front nine, when Nicklaus had birdied number 9 on the front nine on Sunday, and one of his assistants said, Frank, we got Nicklaus just birdieing 9, there's a possibility, you never know, he's a golden bear. And Jacquinian, who was very authoritative, he said, Jack Nicklaus is not a factor in this tournament. I don't want to waste any camera time. So, that shows you how low the mighty had fallen, and so he had made the cut after Friday's round. A lot of people said, "Well, that's good enough. He made the cut. That's nice." And then on Saturday he had a good round, and people were even saying, "Well, good. He's given a nice, good account for himself, so he won't be embarrassed over the weekend." And if he cracks the top 10 and gets close to it, what an accomplishment for a 46-year-old guy. And then Sunday rolls along, and again, the little tidbits that you don't know until you really look into something is I never knew, I was never, as far as I know, never broadcast or written about at the time, certainly, but Jack comes out on Sunday wearing this bright yellow shirt. And he was not, Tiger Woods on Sunday will always wear a red shirt. That's become, you know, his trademark. But other golfers, they just decide, I guess, what's iron, what looks good, what mood they're in, you know, what color they're going to wear. Jack was wearing a bright yellow shirt, and the reason why, it turns out, is that his mother-in-law had died not that long before, and the pastor of the church that was a friend of the Nicklaus family who did the ceremony was talking about his own son, who had only been 12 at the time and died of like leukemia, and saying his favorite color was yellow. So that morning, Jack made sure he had a yellow shirt in honor of his pastor's son. That's why the yellow shirt. Who knew? You know, but that's why it was on. And he had important to point out that his son Jackie, his oldest son, was on the bag for him and caddying for him. And you know, yes, part of it was that they wanted this father-son thing together and to be the Masters together. But you know, the other part of it, a bit of the harsh reality, is in 1986, up to that point, Jack Nicklaus had only made 3 cuts in 7 tournaments and won a grand total of $4,000. Nobody wanted to caddy for him. They weren't making any money. Because a caddy usually would get 10%, you know, like maybe sort of like an ad salesman gets a draw. You get some money, you know, but it would be expenses. But you depend on 10% of your guys' winnings. So far, the first 3 months of 1986, Jack's caddy made $400. And so it was sort of like, Jack, you're on your own at Augusta. And his oldest son said, okay, I'll caddy for you. And that really turned out to be crucial. So Sunday opens up, and it's Sunday, April 13th. And Jack goes out there, and he plays, okay, you know, he's not setting the course on fire. He's not losing strokes, but he's just par. And then he birdies 9, and he's under for his round, and people are starting to notice, but most of the crowd by this point had decided it's the last round on the back 9. We're going to pay attention to the guys most likely to win. And in this tournament, the guys most likely to win were either a couple of Americans, Tom Watson and Tom Kite, or these great non-American golfers who were there that year. Greg Norman, Seve Ballesteros, who already won twice, Bernhard Langer from Germany, who's the defending champion, Tommy Nakajima from Japan, T.C. Chen from China, Nick Price, who had shot a 63 on Saturday from Zimbabwe. These were the guys the crowd were following. And Jack was sort of like, oh, that's nice, you know, just don't embarrass yourself, Jack. And you've had a good career. And then everything started to change when it got to the 10th hole. He birdies the 10th hole, he birdies the 11th hole. And he's starting to move up. He's even starting to, I had the pleasure of, when I was researching this book, I obtained from CBS all their coverage, all their tape of the coverage that they did, and which is great fun to watch. Especially because you knew what was going to happen. You know, you weren't watching it for something exciting was going to happen, and then it sort of fell apart at the end. But I'm watching that you start to, for the very first time, like after the 10th or 11th hole, Nicklaus appears on the leaderboard they show before commercials. You know, he'd never been there. The first 70 holes, or 68, 67 holes, he'd not been there. Finally, there at the bottom is Jack Nicklaus. And then there's a lot of excitement. He tees it up on the par 12, par 3, 12th hole. And it really was upsetting for people, because what happened, this is really a chance to make a difference. And he bogeys the 12th hole. You know, it's sort of like the wheel started to come off, this great surge that he was making. And I just want to, you know, just read something very, very short what the reaction was when it looked so good. It looked like he was finally going to, you know, make this charge happen uninterrupted. And it says, this is when he's putting for par. Jack went through his routine. This time no cheers interrupted him, but he noted just as he moved the putter that about a foot in front of his ball was a spike mark. And I have to point out, spike shoes were still commonly worn in PGA Tour events in 1986. Was this fate exacting revenge? It appeared so when Jack's putt was sent ever so slightly offline by the spike mark, and the ball caressed the lip of the cup without dropping in. Bogey. Once again, the hole had been very unkind to the Golden Bear. The less polite fans in a huge crowd that Sunday afternoon thought much the same thing. He's blown it. Others, even those with a flicker of hope remaining, were suddenly on the brink of conceding their hero's defeat after what had been 4 holes full of hope. To be candid, wrote Herbert Warren Wing, at this stage of the tournament, I didn't think he had a chance to win it. I was simply delighted to see him playing first-class golf again. So, Jack Nicklaus himself could have said, hey, you know what? I got close. I gave a good account for myself. I'm going to have a nice paycheck when this is over. I've got my son with me. In fact, oddly enough, not only was his wife there, but his mother was there. It was the first time she had attended Masters. He was in a tournament since his very first one in 1951. For some reason, she said, I want to go see what the Masters this year. And so she was there with Jack's sister and his wife and his oldest son. So he had his family there, giving a good account for himself. And that, he could have just said, that's enough. But he goes out, he recovers. I thought, I put on a book, I think this was a turning point in the tournament, that instead of being so deflated and saying, I'd done the best I could, he goes out there on 13 and birdies at 13. Then he pars 14, and then it's 15. And 15 is where the crowd had probably his biggest roar yet, because it's the par 5, and he does it in 3 strokes. He eagles 15. And I think just to understand a little bit the accomplishment here, you've got a guy, 15 has got to be his 69th hole of the tournament. All the pressure he's endured. He's 46 years old. He's tramping up and down those hills, and everything at this point is pressure. How do you find the strength and the nerves for that eagle putt? But he found it. So he birdies, he eagles 15, then he birdies 16, and then I just read to you about the birdie on 17, and so we're back to sort of where I began, and a lot of people have thought to this day that when he birdied that 17th hole, he was really actually birding 18, and that was the hole that won the tournament. He birdied that, great celebration, Jack wins, but that's not what happened. And in a way, I'm glad, because it got pretty exciting after that, because he had these other players. He went to 18, and he parred the hole, and it was a good par. Very difficult hole. So he goes into the clubhouse leading by 1 stroke. And then he's got to wait there in the clubhouse with his wife, with his family, as the other players behind him who were tied or a stroke back come through. And so, Watson comes through, and Watson doesn't do it. And he's a guy that already by that point had won 7 majors, so he knew what pressure was like, but he doesn't tie to Nicklaus. Then Ballesteros comes through. He was the favorite. He's the swashbuckling Spaniard who just was at the peak of the #1 golfer in the world at that point. And for some reason, well, they speculated, even Jack speculated that when the roar went up on 17, that Nicklaus had birdied to take in the lead, Ballesteros was just about to hit on 15, and his shot went off this way, and his 2 recovery shots were pretty poor, and he bogeyed the hole. It was sort of like he became deflated by the crowd noise there. And so he came through, he couldn't tie. And then then Tom Kite comes through. And Tom Kite is 1 stroke back. He's got a putt of about 6 or 7 feet to tie Nicklaus and force a playoff.